It's not much what we know about the exceptional life of Simona Martinez, born in 1845 and died in 1902. Perhaps the traditional nature of her last name contributed to the fact that it does not appear in any biographical work. Or perhaps, because those in charge of preserving history, not only of Sinaloa but of the country, have put almost all their efforts into rescuing the male's work. The life of this lady takes place in the south of Sinaloa, in the second half of the 19th century, and she was probably born in Rosario, approximately in 1845. To learn about her life, we turn to what is written about her husband, her sons, and daughters, as well as the files of the Civil Registry of El Rosario, in charge of Guadalupe Borrego. The personal file of the official chronicler of the asylum city of El Rosario, Francisco H. Bautier. Also from the Municipal Historical Archive of Mazatlan, which is kept by Sergio Herrera y Cairo, and the archives of the Bradbury family, deposited at the University of California, which is managed by Liz Phillips, and several works on the history of southern Sinaloa. We managed to establish that Simona came from humble people in the region, and that her relationship with Bradbury began when he hired her as her servant. Instead, Louis Leonard Bradbury descended from an English family established in the state of Maine since the 17th century. In 1860, he was already a millionaire resident of Oakland, California. One of his partners was Thomas Bell, owner of the San Francisco Bank. There were few capitalists established in Mazatlan who did not have dealings with Bell. Merchants such as the Melchers, Clausen, Lehotza, Felton, Paredes, Norris, Copel, and Kelly are just a few. Mr. Kelly was an English consul when Bradbury acquired from him the first shares of the Taha mines in 1860. The name of the old Real de Nuestra Señora del Rosario comes from a legend where a peasant who lost some of his rosary beads had to make a fire to spend the night. At dawn on August 4, 1655, he found under the ashes a silver plate, which the fire had melted. An historical narrator says about this, that the hill was cut up to where the vein cut into the ground, and that's why the mine was called El Taha. Just as the real one was called Del Rosario, because this garment gave rise to the discovery of the mine. The popular adage goes that behind every powerful man, there is a woman. And Bradbury was no exception. The mestizo beauty of Simona Martinez, and her children that she gave him, was the reason for their marriage in Mazatlan, in January 1867. She was 21, Bradbury, 45. At 9 months, on October 23, 1867, Simonetta was born. Maria Rosario, January 18, 1870. Luisa in 1876. All of them registered in El Rosario. The other three, Minerva, John, and Luis Jr., were born in California. The Bradburys had a residence in Mazatlan, which consisted of 7 rooms, a kitchen, and an entrance hall, located on Arsenal Street, now Carranza, on the corner with Encla. That property was sold by Simona in April 1891, to Casa Hidalgo Carrega and Company. The buyers operated a commercial warehouse, just across the street from where the art museum now stands. Osas Coli Sunsa wrote that the construction next to the Morales Sports Club, on Sixto Osuna Street, was acquired by Simona in October 1894. The seller was Carlos Ulrich, Vice-Consul of Great Britain. Simona began with this acquisition what would later be the stately entrance to the Patio Andaluz, and the gardens of the Belmar Hotel. At the top of the house facade, the Bradbury coat of arms can still be seen. His neighbors to one side were the Redu de la Vega family. In 1880, the Bradburys moved to Oakland, and 3 years later, due to asthmatic ailments from old Louis Bradbury, to the Duarte Ranch, where they had purchased 2,750 acres and built a mansion. The value of these lands rose with the construction of the railways. The Bradburys were no strangers to the railway business. In the company books, we found that they had invested $30,000 in the service of electric trains and cable of Oakland, Piedmont. The legal representative of the assets was Judge John Bicknell, the same one who represented the interests of the railway tycoon, Leland Stanford. There were also company plans to build railways and exploit the forests of the Sierra Madre, due to the scarcity and urgent need for coal to operate the mine. On her husband's death in 1892, Simona inherited a third of his fortune, and declared executor of the rest of it. In 1893, she moved to Massillon to take over the mining operation. In December, she is invited to the New Year's Eve party, traditionally offered by the Echeguren family, to the cream of the local society. On that occasion, the poet, Amado Nervo, under the pseudonym Adon, described something about that evening in El Correo de la Tarde, on January 8, 1894. Mrs. Bradbury, sovereignly beautiful, dressed in lilac silk, wore a rich star in diamonds in her toupee. I have seen the fairies of children's stories adorned like this, in the illustrations of my favorite books, back in my distant childhood. Simona and her husband commissioned the construction of Broadway Street, in Los Angeles in 1889. The $125,000 contract was awarded to self-taught architect George Wayman. The legend accompanies the building, that her design is inspired by a novel inserted in the year 2010, where her deceased brother also participates, through a Ouija board. Listed as a historical monument, the Bradbury Building is the oldest commercial complex in Los Angeles. And it is so spectacular that it has been the film setting for TV series and movies, such as Chinatown and Blade Runner. On its rear facade, it has a gigantic mural, which shows a dancer Anthony Quinn, interpreting Zorba the Greek. To honor the source of her wealth, Simona commissioned out of her own money, another neighboring building, known as El Taha. Her daughter Minerva, wife of Isaac H. Polk, second cousin of the President of the United States, James Polk, hired Robert Farquhar, the architect of the Pentagon, to build them a mansion at a cost of $85,000. The Los Angeles Daily Times newspaper broke the news on August 4, 1902, that Mrs. Bradbury was in serious health, and was being cared for by Dr. Isaac Ribas, former Mexican consul in San Francisco, and relative of the architect, who created of the Independence Monument, in Mexico City. Months later, her condition aggravated. She asked to be transferred to Oakland, where according to the newspaper, the LA Times, she finally died on December 12. Her remains rest next to her husband in a crypt, guarded by a gigantic angel, at the entrance to her family mausoleum. Devoted to the Virgin of the Immaculate Conception, patron saint of the people of Massillon, Simona's last wish was that a church be built, in honor of the Virgin in her memory. Her family complied with the directive, and they donated a piece of land in Monrovia, California, and all the construction costs. The first stone was laid on June 25, 1903, by the Bishop of Monterey, Thomas Connery. And it was inaugurated in 1906. The sacred precinct was recently expanded and remodeled. 1910 records the appearance of the Eternal Atom, Jules Verne's posthumous novel. It is a chilling apocalyptic novel, set in El Rosario, and a planet Earth ship, which succumbs to an uncontrollable rise of the oceans, in the 21st century. The alleged narrator, deciphered by another colleague, was the owner of the El Taha mine, and whose driver had the curious surname of Simonet, indicating that the writer was well informed about the owners of the mine. Professor Charlotte Schneider, a descendant of one of the mine's partners, knew of a lady from El Rosario, who corresponded with the famous French novelist. When Verne wrote the above, the first cars were just beginning to roll in France. According to Osses Cole, Juan Bradbury was the first to acquire a motor car in the state, in the year 1900. In the 1930s, and by way of retribution, the company donated a piece of land, measuring 40 by 100 meters, free of charge, to the federal government, for the construction of the new church, where the town had to move its famous gold altarpiece, and stone by stone, of the exquisite Churrigueresque style facade, of the most beautiful church on the continent, which collapsed as a result of the explosions, ordered by the mine administrators. To have a mine, says an old adage, it is necessary to have another mine. After 1910, the company did not survive the forced loans of the revolutionaries, the recession of the 20s, the fall in silver prices, and even a cyclone, where the mine manager lost his life. Finally, on December 24, 1930, the board of directors decided to sell the Belmar Hotel, the company's flagship building, to the Company of Hôtels et Déportés Inc. Then they were auctioned off to the light poles, in El Rosario. The Bradbury Empire was crumbling, their descendants were never able to resurrect the mine.